Subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. Good morning. I want to welcome everybody to today's hearing. We're going to hear from our non-federal partners on some of the innovations that they're using to improve our surface transportation system. The FAST Act was reauthorized, the federal surface transportation programs through fiscal year 2020. And through these programs, our non-federal partners are investing in research, transportation technologies, and other innovations to meet the current and future needs of our communities. For example, some of our communities have invested in intelligent transportation systems, others have experimented with autonomous and connected vehicles, and some have been partnering with the private sector to improve the quality of life for the general public. The population and the amount of freight moving through our nation is projected to increase significantly over the coming decades. And being innovative and utilizing transportation technologies where it makes sense to do so is going to help our surface transportation system move people and goods safely and more efficiently. Innovative solutions and transportation technologies are going to be applied differently across our nation, and it's vital that we share the best practices and the best lessons that are learned. The leaders with us here today are going to showcase some of those innovations and technologies that are currently being used on our highways and our public transit systems. Congress has to continue to provide our non-federal partners with the flexibility to implement innovative solutions and to deploy transportation technologies that are going to work best for them. With that, I look forward to your testimony, and I now turn to Ranking Member Norton for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate this hearing. This is a fascinating time to be a member of this committee and this subcommittee. I remember when I first chose this committee and see now how it's changed and believe it's got to change even further, because our mission is no longer about cars and trucks and roads and bridges. I mean, of course, there was a time when we had surface transportation bills passed, and when they passed, the amount of money we put into roads and bridges automatically went up. That's gone. While we're fixing that, we must not take our eyes off of these fast-moving technological advances, which under our feet and right before our eyes are changing the way people move, the way they get from one destination to the other. We see in technology, transportation technology, innovations that can solve some of our worst problems. Those of you, I mean, every member sees those problems just getting to the House through the streets of the District of Columbia. We see that the new technology may not only help us solve these excruciating congestion problems, but can help us save lives and innovate for safety. For example, the cars that drive themselves, the electric cars, make us nervous when we hear about a car without a driver until we learn that those cars are far safer than the cars that we ourselves drive. Now, there's been a safety mishap here and there, but compare that to the mishaps that occur every day on the streets of the United States. The whole notion of being able to have a choice as to the form of transportation. And we already see those choices coming before us. Will it be an Uber or a Lyft? Will it be a subway? Will I take my car? Not too long ago, most people didn't have but one choice when it came from getting from one place to another. At the same time, and I must, I think, call attention to the two screens that we have to have before us. Because while we're looking to the future, as I'm grateful that this hearing does, we have immediate problems in the near term, and those problems really do have to do with old-fashioned 20th century surface transportation problems that need to be addressed. We have a funding crisis, and we've not yet found any way to increase funding for old-fashioned transportation needs. Witness how we got the FAST Act passed. We got it passed because we simply said that we declared a 6-year bill was a 5-year bill. And therefore, there was more money because it was over 5 years. We can't keep doing that. So we've got to work on both kinds of transportation, the new transportation that's coming at us, like it or not, and the old-fashioned transportation that we still haven't caught up on us, with us. We're looking for the most cost-effective and efficient transportation solutions, and we're looking for commercially viable solutions because that's the way to make these new innovations available to the public. I do want to indicate that while I am excited about these innovations for the way they will affect big cities like the ones I represent, these changes are critical for rural areas as well. I want to commend Mr. Castillo for your testimony, which reminds us, it's Ms. Castillo, of the investment necessary in rural America and how they are consistent with the kinds of innovations that I've just indicated. We need to consider that suburban and rural areas benefit from the same options that I've been describing. So I will be particularly mindful of and attentive to your testimony as we prepare for a new surface transportation bill while thinking on the other side of the brain about how to bring transportation innovation into the 21st century. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have Congressman DeFazio, who's a ranking member of the full committee, with us. And I'd ask for your statement.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks very much for holding this hearing. Obviously, we're looking at a very large number of traffic deaths this year. Congestion is worse than ever, and the question is, how much will new technologies be able to address these concerns, both the fatalities and the congestion? I think there's great promise, but there are a lot of unanswered questions as we move forward. Last year, about a year ago, I went out to California. I called it my visit to the future. I visited Autodesk, and I went to Uber to see their driver-assisted truck, Tesla, and Waymo. And it was pretty extraordinary, particularly not plugging anybody here, but the Waymo at Mountain View at near rush hour with construction and all sorts of the driver never even got close to touching the wheel. It was an extraordinary experience, and I can see where these technologies could both facilitate dealing with congestion. You get frustrated sitting at traffic lights when the jerk in front of you is on the cell phone and didn't see the light change. The cars will take care of those problems in the future. But then there are questions about what are the algorithms. I visited, I was online, I think it was Texas Transportation Institute, I'm not sure who it was, but they had an online quiz to see what the algorithm should look like, and they gave you a series of incidents, you're driving the car, a kid runs in front of you with a ball, you're going to turn and crash into a wall. Okay, well, you're going to turn and crash into the wall. Another one is you just saw some guy mug somebody, he's running across the street with his purse, you can turn and crash into the wall, you can run over the mugger. What are you going to choose? Well, I chose run over the mugger. So, but I mean, what are the algorithms going to be? So it was an interesting test, and at the end they showed what the history was. And then the question of sort of where we are today, which is it's all voluntary, it's all based in the innovation that's going forward, which I think with a new technology is appropriate, but at some point it has to be integrated into the national system. And if it's going to be integrated into a uniform national system, at some point the government is going to have to be involved in setting some regulation dealing with the industry. We don't want to end up with things that are incompatible with one another. You know, I was on Homeland for so many years, and we never, I don't even think they've still gotten to totally, I'm trying to remember the word, but I mean integrated communication systems, compatibility. And so the same thing here with these technologies. So we've got to be sure that there aren't going to be conflicts between competitors and different technologies and things that will, you know, perhaps work in some areas of the country, won't work in others. I mean, when I think it was Waymo said that they were having trouble with rain, so they were trying to operate in Seattle, and they kind of were doing okay with rain, but they're still having trouble with snow and other things. So I mean, obviously it is an evolving technology, very quickly evolving, but at some point we are going to have to make sense of it and in an integrated 21st century system for the country, and that's why we're here today, to learn more about how we might do that. So thank you for holding the hearing.
All right, I want to again welcome our panel here. And today we have Mr. James Barna, who's the Executive Director of Drive Ohio. We have Ms. Julia Castillo, who's the Executive Director at Heart of Iowa Regional Transit Agency, and she's here on behalf of the Community Transportation Association of America. Mr. Shaylin Batt, President and CEO of ITS America, and Mr. Randall Iwasaki, who's the Executive Director of Contra Costa Transportation Authority. And I would ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record, and without objection, that is so ordered. And since your written testimony is being made a part of the record, the committee would request that you try to limit your summary to 5 minutes. And with that, we'll start with Mr. Barna.
Thank you, Chairman Graves. Chairman Graves, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee, my name is Jim Barna. I serve as the Executive Director of Drive Ohio. I'm pleased to appear here today on behalf of Governor John Kasich and Ohio Director of Transportation Jerry Ray to talk with you about the important ways we are preparing Ohio for the future of smart mobility. With autonomous and connected vehicles dominating both the automotive and infrastructure agendas across the globe, Drive Ohio was created by Governor Kasich as a one-stop shop for those looking to safely develop, test, and deploy advanced mobility solutions in Ohio. We are establishing Ohio's leadership in this realm by providing a single point of collaboration for the dozens of public and private entities in our state that are involved in the design, development, testing, use, and regulation of autonomous and connected technologies. As the State Center for Smart Mobility, Drive Ohio brings these agencies and organizations under one umbrella, serving as a single point of contact for all of Ohio's smart mobility initiatives and advancements. Drive Ohio fosters cooperation, innovation, and collaboration, offers faster access to resources by breaking down government barriers for people and organizations that want to be part of this industry. Our work is guided by 4 fundamental pillars: transportation safety, which is first and foremost, reliability, mobility, and workforce. We have nearly a dozen smart mobility projects either under construction or soon to be announced. Projects aimed at testing advanced transportation technologies in a variety of real-life smart mobility applications, including improved access to work, education, healthcare, and the essentials of a healthy, productive life. One of the biggest things we are learning is the importance of using public-private partnerships to achieve our goals. Our public sector partners, including 9 state agencies and municipalities from across the state, are participating in working groups along with the automotive industry, academia, and Ohio's world-class research and development institutions. Together, they are working to ensure Ohio stays on the cutting edge of smart mobility, technology, standardization, infrastructure, and implementation. One example that is well underway is our 33 Smart Mobility Corridor, a 35-mile stretch of US 33 northwest of Columbus, which is being equipped with some of the highest concentrations of connected vehicle infrastructure in the country. Working with a collaborative team of local governments along with the Transportation Research Center, Honda, Bosch, Michael Baker International, and others, We are equipping the 4-lane divided highway with fiber optic cable and wireless roadside sensors. Midway along this corridor, we are working with local officials in Honda on a project to install dedicated short-range communication units in every traffic signal in the city of Marysville. When fully operational, connected signals will communicate with as many as 1,500 public and private vehicles we will be equipping with onboard units. This will provide the largest concentration of connected vehicles and infrastructure in the country. The Marysville and US 33 Smart Mobility Corridor projects are each funded in part through a U.S. Department of Transportation grant. In another public-private partnership, Drive Ohio and the Ohio Department of Transportation are working with the City of Columbus, the Columbus Partnership, and the Ohio State University to soon deploy a low-speed, self-driving passenger shuttle service around the downtown area. This is part of a 3-phase plan to help develop guidelines that will inform future developments or deployments of self-driving technology in Columbus and throughout the state of Ohio. Ohio has a singular advantage in our work to advance these technologies. We are home to the Transportation Research Center, a 4,500-acre automotive proving ground, the largest and most advanced in North America. Now with a $45 million investment by the state of Ohio, Jobs Ohio, and the Ohio State University, the Transportation Research Center is building the SMART Center, the largest automated and connected vehicle testing facility in the world, strategically located at one end of the US 33 Smart Mobility Corridor. By supporting projects like those I've described and others sure to follow, Drive Ohio is committed to advancing smart mobility solutions and innovation that will benefit transportation safety, efficiency, and economic impact, not only in Ohio, but throughout this entire great nation. Thank you for letting me share the Ohio story. I've provided additional details in my written testimony, and I will be happy to answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you. Ms. Castillo.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Holmes, Norton, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Julia Castillo, and I'm the Executive Director of HRDA the Heart of Iowa Regional Transit Agency, better known as HRDA, and I've been there for 8 years. It is with great appreciation and honor to be selected on behalf of the Community Transportation Association of America and its members to appear before you today regarding innovations in public transportation. HRDA's service area is a 7-county, 4,200 square mile region with a population of 321,000. We provide approximately 300,000 trips per year, traveling over 1.3 miles with a 95% on-time rate. All of this can be a challenging task for Iowa, has the second oldest fleet of public transportation vehicles in the United States. In our community, HRDA is the safest way to go, with our 87 drivers having traveled 218,000 miles since our last preventable incident. Innovations in rural transit look different than in urban transit, but the goals, more efficient service to more people, they're the same. Staff and resources of rural transit systems like mine are far more limited than in urban communities. For rural transit, the most obvious path to innovation is through vehicles. We have a fleet of 84 fully accessible vehicles, which range from 2-passenger to 18-passenger capacity. Rural transit systems like mine perform at our best when we're able to effectively group trips and right-size our fleet to customer demand. Our service can't be a one-size-fits-all. Different size vehicles allow us to be more responsive and flexible. Thanks to Congress's leadership in increasing dedicated bus capital, the transit industry is making headway in reducing the national bus capital backlog. To build on that investment, we must explore practical applications such as autonomous vehicles. Some small urban transit providers, such as my fellow CTAA member StarTran in Lincoln, Nebraska, have been testing autonomous vehicles in limited applications to determine their effectiveness. Both small urban and rural transit providers will need technical assistance and peer examples to embrace and implement these new technologies, while federal legislation on autonomous vehicles needs careful consideration by Congress to ensure these vehicles are accessible, safe, convenient, and affordable for all Americans. At the same time, there have been innovations in technology that rural transit providers across the country have been utilizing for more than a decade. Our Route Match centralized scheduling and dispatch software allows us to make real-time decisions about serving our customers across a wide geographic area. HRDA Now was started because there was a need for same-day service where people don't have to reserve their trip 24 hours in advance. They can call anytime we're open, and we pick them up and take them where they need to go. Rural and specialized transportation providers such as Oates in Missouri, which serves your district, Mr. Chairman, and Suburban Transit Network in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, have also developed efficient same-day and on-demand service, which is an important innovation in rural areas. People don't live in advance. Sometimes things happen and people need a ride now, not tomorrow. And since most rural areas do not have Ubers, Lyfts, or even taxis, HRDA decided we could provide the same type of service, so we've become the Uber in our area. Our newest and most exciting project, which launched last month, is a smartphone app and online payment option known as Amble. This allows our riders to manage their own trips, including scheduling, canceling, and payment. Combined technologies like Amble are what smaller communities and public transit providers like mine are striving to implement. In Norwalk, Connecticut, the CTAA member Norwalk Transit District is set to launch an on-demand ride-sharing service known as Wheels to You that will utilize a similar scheduling and fare payment app. Additionally, in 2017, we developed a 10-year strategic plan crafted with elected officials, private partners, customer groups, and more. And as a result, we are now working on deploying new innovations such as HRDA Works, which is a van pool service for commuters, getting them into factories and large employers in our most rural areas. HRDA Job Links, which is going to be a commuter shuttle, getting employees to jobs in our rural areas. And we've been working with job service programs and employers, as well as local officials, to make this happen. Deviated route service in the city of Newton, CTAA members have launched similar deviated routes recently in small towns like Georgetown, Kentucky, and Bedford, Maine. An important innovation for all forms of public transportation is better understanding of the outcomes of our services create: healthcare outcomes, employment, independence, and education. Using data, we must demonstrate how our services benefit entire communities, even for those who never ride public transit. Failure to do this creates challenges. For example, many of my peers are innovating with non-emergency medical transportation to diversify their funding sources and provide more efficient services to healthcare destinations. CTAA members in Flint, Michigan, the Flint MTA, has developed a fleet of sedans and minivans to serve non-emergency medical trips within 30 minutes through its Ride to Wellness program. Since its launch in September of 2016, it's grown from transporting 160 people a month to more than 1,000 per day. In closing, our responsibility as rural transit systems is to stay in the know, keep up with industry standards, look for and secure additional funding, determine what technology makes sense to enhance the customer's experience and allow staff to operate more efficiently. We all know the community and public transportation industry is changing. The vehicles and technology we use may evolve. However, people will always need to get somewhere. I look forward to answering any questions you think of, and thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on behalf of HRDA and CTAA.
Thank you. Mr. Batt?
Thank you, Chairman Graves and Ranking Member Holmes Norton, for the opportunity to testify today. Over the past 15 years, I have been appointed by 3 governors and 1 president to be a leader in transportation across the country. And in that 15 years, we've seen amazing changes in technology. And I believe we're just on the leading edge of that. And it represents the best tool in our toolbox, I believe, to save lives and improve the quality of life for Americans as we move forward. I have picked 5 from our members across the country. We're actually going to submit a report later this year based on this hearing, but we could literally have picked a project in all of your districts because that's how widespread across the country these deployments are. So we'll start with Colorado, where I was the director of the Colorado Department of Transportation. When I was there, people would say, why is traffic so bad in Colorado? And I would say it's because we have a transportation system that was designed in the 50s, built in the 60s for a population of the 1980s. Colorado has doubled that, and we're still existing on that same infrastructure. So we created our Road X program, and one of the projects that we had come out of there was what we called Smart 25. So this is a deployment that's going to go live next year. We actually stole this idea from Melbourne, Australia, and basically what it is, it's intelligent ramp metering. And so you have ramp meters that know the storage capacity on the ramps. It knows the speed of the traffic on the highway, and when that speed starts to break down, it stops letting people onto the highway, so you never lose the maximum capacity of the highway. When they deployed this in Melbourne, they saw a 35 to 60% improvement in average speed and a reduction in congestion. Australians follow traffic laws a little bit better than Americans, so we think that they might see 20% improvement, but that's the equivalent of adding a lane on I-25 in that 18-mile stretch. And in 20 years, we think that that'll save about 500,000 hours of passenger vehicle time and about 50,000 hours of freight, because this is an important corridor both for the Denver metro area and to move freight from Texas up to the Canadian border. Moving from Colorado to Florida and staying with this theme of freight. So safety is a huge issue when it comes to freight. We always talk about making sure that we don't have drivers that are too tired. One of the challenges for truck drivers is when they leave in the morning, they're not sure where they're going to spend the night because they don't know where they can park, because truck parking is a huge challenge for us, creates huge environmental issues. So TPAS is the program that Florida has released. Iowa is doing this as well, lots of other states. But basically, this uses microwave detection and the existing rest stops and way stations so that we can broadcast into the cab so that the truck drivers know at the beginning of their journey where they can spend the night, so they're not wasting time or fuel trying to find a place to park. Also during inclement weather, whether it's snowstorms or hurricanes, it's important to help move people quickly, and we're glad that Florida is leading in this space. Moving from Florida to Michigan, I actually drove on this corridor, the US 23 Flex route this weekend. My wife is from Michigan, and they're doing some amazing things with active traffic management, maximizing throughput using lanes as they go through, using CCTV and traffic counts so that they know when the traffic begins to break down. And because of this system, they've seen a 57% improvement in planning time. Planning time is the time where you think the trip should take this amount of time. So we've seen almost a 60% improvement in that travel time, and a 32% improvement in peak hour travel through that corridor. Moving from Michigan to San Francisco across the bay from Mr. Iwasaki, Metropolitan Transportation Commission, one of our members, sent forward the Bay Bridge Forward initiative. This is a bridge that moves about 300,000 vehicles a day. All kinds of different modes are involved. So there's transit, there's ferries, active transportation is important here, and it's one important aspect here is letting people know where there is parking available through ITS as they move forward so they're not wasting time and energy. This is a very exciting project for this entire region. And then our last project that we have is in Nevada with the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. There are autonomous shuttles, popping up all over the place. University of Michigan, I know, has one. This is exciting in Nevada where they're using automated transit, and this is deploying automated transit to help fix the first mile, last mile challenge. This is live. It provides a test bed for integrated autonomous vehicle deployment, and you're seeing this across the country from Las Vegas to Lincoln, Nebraska. So in closing, I would say thank you for the opportunity to testify. We will provide the report when we're done, and happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Iwasaki.
Thank you, Chairman Graves. Good to see you. Ranking Member Norton, Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member DeFazio, it's good to see you again as well. Thank you for inviting us here this morning. We appreciate it. My name is Randy Iwasaki, and I'm the Executive Director of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. I've been the director for 8 years. Prior to the 8 years at CCTA, I worked for Caltrans for 27 years. I started as an entry-level engineer. I left as the director under Governor Schwarzenegger. I've been fortunate enough to participate on a number of national panels. I was the chairman, recently I was the chairman of the National Freight Advisory Committee, and also the Strategic Highway Research Program. I was the Technical Coordinating Committee chair for renewal of our nation's infrastructure. And so I have experience on the national level as well. The Contra Costa Transportation Authority, we're a public agency. We administer the sales tax. We oversee the planning, the construction, the design of our transportation improvement projects and programs for the county. So we have a staff of 20, but that's not the secret sauce. I think we have a great relationship with our elected officials. So we have an elected board that governs us, 11 members, and they support our big thinking and our innovations. And I think that's pretty critical for us at the authority. One of those is Congressman DeSaulnier. He's been a powerful and tireless transportation advocate for CCTA and the Bay Area. I want to especially thank him for his leadership in sponsoring an important bipartisan bill, H.R. 4421. Along with other leaders such as Congressman Rodney Davis, Congressman Lloyd Smucker, Ranking Member DeFazio, and others, this bipartisan piece of legislation will level a playing field for electric trucks. Because we're responsible for planning, we keep an eye on the future. And so our planning documents look out in the future. And the reason why that's important is your capital improvement programs are based on your planning documents. So if you're not taking into account the next generation of technology, you may be planning your future incorrectly. And I think that's very, very important. I'm here today to talk about 3 projects that we're working on. The first is we founded the largest secure autonomous vehicle test bed in the United States, Momentum Station. We have a large number of partners that are testing there, Honda, Lyft. We also have testing freight, so Uber ATG. And we also have the electric shared autonomous Easy Mile shuttles. And it's also a magnet for startup companies, which is important. And that's why CCTA is leading a pilot demonstration project to test electric low-speed multi-passenger autonomous vehicles manufactured by Easy Mile that are not equipped with a steering wheel, brake pedal, or an accelerator. Earlier this year, we deployed the first ever shared autonomous vehicle on public roads in California. So we got the first 2 licenses for our 2 vehicles on public streets in Contra Costa County in the city of San Ramon. We know that in our county, probably like many of yours, we can no longer build our way out of congestion. And so we have a 7-pronged approach called Innovative 680. I have a document here. There's 7 approaches combined into 4 projects. So express lanes, we're going to complete the express lanes on Interstate 680. It's the 8th worst congested area in Contra Costa, or in the Bay Area. We're going to cool hotspots, so we're going to fix the weaving problem that we have that causes congestion. We're going to run buses on shoulders, so when speeds drop below 35 miles an hour on the main line, we're going to allow those buses to go out on the shoulders. We're going to have adaptive ramp metering to hold the traffic as those buses pass the on-ramps to clear the way for the bus, to keep those buses on schedule. We're also going to do innovative operation strategies, first and last mile connection with our technology. We're going to prepare the corridor for the future. You heard from Ohio that they're preparing their corridor with DSR's dedicated short-range communication and other technologies. We're going to make our park and ride lots smart, and then TDM strategies, transportation demand strategies. So the last example I have, and I have results of it, is we're using an app called Scoop. And so we incentivize using $2 a ride. We're hooking a driver with a rider. And that's very important because we don't need everybody to ride a bus. Just a small percentage of the population will fix congestion. It's like Martin Luther King Day. Not everybody gets that holiday off, but yet the freeways in your communities probably operate pretty well. Why? A small percentage of the community is on vacation that day. And that's what we're looking for at the authority. So thank you very much for the short time that I've had here to share some of the technology projects that we're working on. And I look forward to working with you on the next surface transportation bill. Thank you very much.
All right, with that, we'll move to members and questions, and we're going to start with Mr. Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for witness speaking here. To Mr. Barna, Drive Ohio, welcome. I visited your facility. It's an excellent facility. I also want to thank you for participating in the press conference that we had requesting that Secretary Chow officially designate the Transportation Research Center as a federal autonomous vehicle proving ground. As you know, the outgoing Obama administration made only 10 designations around the country, and TSC was not one of the 10, despite you've tested autonomous vehicles for more than 40 years, and I think it's really should be a part of that to get that extra resources. In your opinion, why should the United States Department of Transportation include TRC as a federally designated autonomous vehicle proving ground?
Chairman Graves, Representative Gibbs, thank you. My understanding is those designations were made under the Obama administration as a community of practice, with the idea that they would share information as far as testing research around autonomous connected vehicles. I believe TRC, being the largest independent automotive proving ground in North America, would offer prominently as far as contributing information as far as testing research to that community of practice. As I mentioned before, the TRC's 4,500 acres in size. And within that 4,500 acres in size, 540 are being now, well, it's under construction now, is building a autonomous vehicle, connected vehicle testing facility. And let alone that, TRC is connected to a smart corridor, the US 33 corridor I mentioned in my testimony. As well, it's the only facility where NHTSA crashes vehicles.
Yeah, I agree, and I think also a note that that happened, I think, the day before President Trump's inauguration, so it might have been not completely thought out as well as it should have been. Another question, Mr. Barna. Commercial communication providers, are increasingly connecting cars and smart cities technologies like we're doing in Columbus, Ohio, with cellular networks and deploying fiber to support 4G light networks and future 5G networks. What role do you see the providers, whether fiber or cellular, in supporting connected vehicles?
Chairman Graves, Representative Gibbs, I believe they will play a role in the connected vehicle environment. When we look at connected vehicles, whether it's a vehicle communicating with another vehicle or a vehicle communicating with infrastructure or vice versa, where tomorrow we see the vehicles providing us a lot of information as far as infrastructure is concerned. Instead of us having instrumentation on the highways, your vehicle will give us a lot of information, whether the headlights come on, whether the windshield wipers come on, your anti-skid technology comes on. All that information will be fed via either direct short-range communication or cellular to the folks monitoring the infrastructure, and as well, the folks monitoring the infrastructure can push information instantaneously out to those vehicles via those via the 5G or the short-range communication, which would have the fiber backhaul.
Okay, Mr. Asaki, as you know, your Contra Costa Go Mentrum station was one of the 10 who received the U.S. Department AV Proving Ground designation by the Obama administration. Your program director sent a letter to Secretary Chow in support of the TRC being designated as an AV Proving Ground. Would you please share your views on the DOT AV Proving Ground designation program, and if you still support the TRC being designated?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually going to visit TRC in Ohio to try to form a partnership to make sure that we're sharing the data. So when you become one of the 10 designated, or when we did, we agreed to a couple of things. One, there was no money available. Number two was we would create a safety officer, which we did. That's Jack Hall. And then three, we'd share information. So we're making a concerted effort to go out to TRC to see if they still want to partner with us. And we can do some testing that they can't. So our pavement is very old. The bridges are old. It's very hard for a contractor to mimic old pavement that's reflective of maybe the conditions of the roads in all parts of the country.
California especially, but okay.
Versus a brand new pavement. And so I think there's some synergies that we can have with Ohio, because it's a state-of-the-art test bed. We understand that, and I think that they'd be a great partner for a Momentum station.
Well, great. Thanks for all being here. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I must say the testimony that all of you have given has told me much I did not know about how innovation is proceeding, notwithstanding anything that happens in the Congress. It just looks like it is happening, and that states, localities are making it happen. So I find it very exciting. I couldn't tell, and maybe I could begin with Mr. Bott, whether we are, since the 1,000 flowers look like they're blooming out there already, and I'm trying to find what role Congress should play in facilitating this new mobility, transportation mobility around the country. For example, typically, the federal government has a role in safety, and so when we think about autonomous vehicles, we have to focus on that. We have to think about taxpayer dollars. Essentially, are we in a period of experimentation where the federal government will be irrelevant when we do the next surface transportation bill? Or should we be thinking about ways to incorporate the kind of innovations you are describing into our bill. For example, just to take at the local level here in the nation's capital. The streets are very crowded, so everybody likes to get an Uber or a Lyft when they want to. But the streets are already crowded, and almost anybody can use his or her private car for Uber or Lyft. At the same time, the investment by the Congress and the localities in transit has been so meager that our subway system was falling apart. So what the city is doing, because it's got to limit the number of cars out there, is it is putting some taxes on Uber and Lyft in order to help pay for the transportation system underground, because it's got to keep both going, and yet it's got to get some of those cars off the streets. So when I see what's happening in the nation's capital, I'm wondering, what should we be doing as we prepare for the next surface transportation bill? Is anything you're saying part and parcel of what should be in a bill, should be facilitated by a bill, should be encouraged by a bill? I'm talking about the next surface transportation bill. Looks pretty clear that it won't look a lot like the last one, which was all about roads and bridges and trucks and cars. So if the federal government has a role through its 5 or 6 year transportation bills, you could help us to learn what the innovations you have described could be incorporated into the next bill. So any of your ideas, beginning with you, Mr. Barton, and any of the rest of you, I'd be most informed by your ideas. I mean, or should we just let it happen out there and just leave it all alone?
Thank you, Ranking Member Holmes Norton. I think that it is happening, and you can see across the country, and we have members who are states, who are cities, who are private sector members, who are research institutions, and so it is happening. I do think there is a role for the federal government to play to ensure uniformity across the country. I think that the FAST Act began a nice transition, opened up some opportunities for jurisdictions to use some federal funding. I think that there are a couple of bills that are looking at the autonomous vehicles, one in the House, one in the Senate, that I think that it would be good to get a national framework around safety. Safety is our #1 priority. It would be good to not have 50 different states and 400 cities all doing something a little different. I do agree with you that the approach to moving people, we used to talk about moving cars, and now I think it's about moving people and data and freight. And this is a little different in terms of how we approach the next bill. So it is one that needs to be multimodal, and I will stop there and see if anybody else has any other ideas they'd like to add.
Ms. Castillo?
I think the federal government absolutely needs to be involved. My concern, if you're not, is that the rural systems will be left behind because everybody will focus then again on the urban systems. And I understand congestion. I know that that is something that is absolutely needs to be handled and taken care of. But there are a lot of people in the rural areas, they need transportation just as much as those people do, even though they're less congested, they still have places to go. And I think there is a place for autonomous vehicles in those areas and more technology. It's easier for us to get things done sometimes in the rural areas. I just have to get approval by my board to say, this is the way we want to go, and we figure out the funding and go on and just get it done. So there are some pluses for having innovation in rural areas, but I absolutely do think that the federal government needs to stay involved, if nothing else, to look out for the rural areas and to ensure that all autonomous vehicles are held to the same safety standards. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Wasker.
Ranking Member Norton, great question. I have a couple of points. One, sometimes regulations will meaningful regulations will get in the way of innovation. So you have to kind of steer clear of that, understand what that technology will do. I think in the area of a low-speed shuttle, we see that as probably the only technology or one of the few technologies that will help us get to the underserved parts of our community, the people that are disabled, old like me, and the folks that don't choose not to own a car or can't afford a car. You can get to that part of the community. The problem is the regulations don't address those vehicles. It's too heavy. And so under the NHTSA guidelines, anything under 2,500 production unit over 2 years, a speed of less than 35 miles an hour, but the weight is 3,000 pounds or less. It's really a golf cart for the neighborhood electric vehicle program. These vehicles weigh 6,000 pounds, 7,000 pounds, so they're in a gray area. And so that's one of the things that we have to go to NHTSA for every one we bring into the country or we deploy. And that's probably not going to work into the future. And the other thing, and this is really a bigger issue, but it's data. And there's some data that's proprietary that the partners don't want to share. But imagine a day when instead of being reactive to safety issues, we're going to be proactive. So these vehicles, they can see at 360 degrees around them. They're gathering information. They can see where they're near misses. And so when I worked for Caltrans, what we did is you had accident concentration. You didn't get the near miss data. And so you just were very reactive. We want to be proactive and understand where those near misses are, so sharing of the data is going to be critical in the future. And lastly, I think, just off the top of my head, procurement. So when you try to procure technology, it takes a while to go through that process. In the meantime, they're on version 4 and you're trying to procure version 1. And that's going to be a problem, I think, in the future with the rapid pace of deployment of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Schuster.
Thank you, Chairman Graves. Thank all of you for being here today. Just following up on talking about autonomous transit vehicles and really the cost. There's just not enough money to go around. And I think in the FAST Act, I know we kept the formula the same, 80-20. But what are the, talking about funding, what are the ways that transit systems can cut costs significantly? Can you address that, Mr. Bott?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Graves and Representative Schuster, and thank you for your work in this space. When I was the Secretary of Transportation in Delaware, we saw our transit budget for paratransit go from $15 million in 2003, I'm roughing these numbers, $15 million to $50 million because of the demand of people wanting access to the service. And that was a challenge for us because each ride that we provided cost the state $50, and we charged $2 for that trip. So you could see how a return trip quickly got us, quickly became a challenge. And so one of the things we started doing was looking to partner with private sector partners where we would just offer them $20. Didn't really matter as long as they met safety standards. I believe that the autonomous shuttles that are being deployed across the country represent a huge opportunity for us to cut those costs, provide better service. As Ms. Castillo said, you have to place a call 24 hours before, sometimes 48 hours before, and then that ride sometimes doesn't show up. With an autonomous service, it's cheaper, it's more flexible, and it provides better service. So that'd be one example.
And improve safety.
And improve safety,
right.
as long as it was done correctly.
Right. So autonomous vehicles, that's really that's the path forward if we're going to find out how to expand transit systems and not costs keep going through the roof.
Sir, just to qualify, I was referring to the rural transit part of that. I do think that transit in urban areas needs to be part of the solution. I think that some of the first mile, last mile challenges, getting people to those trunk lines, the existing either rail or bus lines that are out there, I think that will help because that's a big challenge for us, is how to get people from the house in their subdivision out to a main line. That's a real challenge.
I was in Las Vegas and I rode on the autonomous shuttle. It only holds about 9 right now, but I think they have a model that goes up to maybe 22 or 24. But they took us around the city and nobody was driving it. They had to go pretty slow because of they're going through the process. But it just seems to me that that's a big answer for us, especially if you're on a line, you're on a rail system. We know where the train's going. And it just seems to me that's the place we ought to be really focused to look to make those those tremendous cost cuts and improve transit significantly. And the other question I have is I'm traveling to Pittsburgh on Monday to meet with Argo AI, which is Ford's autonomous vehicle company, Uber, and Carnegie Mellon, just to sort of get a brief on where they are, what they need. And so what do you think some of the things from your perspective that I'm going to hear from autonomous vehicle developers? What's the government need to do? What's the government not need to do? Because I know the one thing I'm sure of is we can't keep up with the technology. The minute we figure out it's okay, it's a whole new technology. So what are some of the things you might tell me that the government should do or shouldn't do to make sure we're going to be the leaders in the world in autonomous vehicles? Start with Mr. Varna.
Chairman Graves, Representative Schuster, I do believe the federal government has a role as far as facilitating a conversation in this. You know, I'm not a big fan of regulation, but I think because we're looking at 50 states and there are a lot of great things happening out there, as my colleague Mr. Bott mentioned, as well as the other colleagues, I do believe at some point we're going to have a national conversation on setting standards, interoperability standards. So if we're driving in one state and we drive to the next state, it's all the same. In a way that promotes the technology. I believe this technology has an opportunity, will impact transportation like never before. So it's very important that we have the interoperability between the states, not regulation necessary, but interoperability, consistency, and some standardization.
So speaking from a rural perspective, the first mile, last mile is something that is also very important to us because a lot of people that live in the rural areas do work in the urban areas. And so we can partner with our urban transit providers as rural providers if we can cover some of that first mile, last mile stuff. And I also just want to encourage people to keep in mind the different types of people that use transportation. You know, they're not all just young and wanting something new and improved, but we have a lot of people you know, that have some cognitive disorders or health issues, or they are older. I think the autonomous vehicles can serve them just as well if they understand them and if they are considered safe and you know, usable for, accessible for all types of people. Because when we do talk about accessible vehicles, that's not just for people that have some physical disability. Accessibility means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I would just keep those things in mind. But we, I know CTAA also really supports piloting some autonomous vehicles and the future of that, especially in some of the rural areas. Thank you.
Representative Schuster, I'll be speaking at ITS Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh Monday morning, and I'm sure that they would love for you to come by if you had a moment.
Who's in Pittsburgh besides?
ITS Pennsylvania is having their annual meeting. I just thought I'd flag that for you. I would say when you're talking to those companies, I think this is the federal role that is important here. I spoke in China earlier this year at the Beijing Auto Forum, and they were very clear that they wanted to dominate the automobile manufacturing and communications technology sectors over the coming decade. And this is, I think, the most important message that from a federal perspective is that we're going to create one market in the United States with standards across the entire country as opposed to having 50 different states and a bunch of different cities. So I think the economic certainty would be a great one to promote.
Mr. Yawasaki?
I agree with Shaylin. That's the key thing. You can't create a car for 50 states, so the federal government has to regulate it so it's interoperable throughout our country, and then they have to sell their products somewhere else. Right. So that's the key piece that they would tell you.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Ranking Member DeFazio.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Batt, you mentioned the difference between Melbourne and Denver in terms of throughput because you alluded to Aussies being a little more law-abiding or something. Tell me about that quickly. I mean, here's a question. I'm trying to figure this out in my head. So you get people at the ramps, you're increasing the throughput on the freeway, but at some point previously there were more people, you know, there must be some backup on the ramps, and I saw your little graph, and there's a little bit of backup, but at some point the ramps are going to get unmanageable also, right? I mean, how's that being handled?
Carefully, sir. Thank you, Representative DeFazio and Chairman Graves. As quickly as I can, I will say we use 2,000 vehicles per lane per hour is what an interstate lane will move. Mm-hmm. And when you start to get friction and you start to get that start-stop effect, you start to break down that number. And so the reason I made the comment about the Aussies is that they have incredibly high levels of compliance because they enforce traffic penalties a lot more punitively there. Two, they have photo enforcement, and they'll hold people for up to 4 minutes on that ramp. And I think that we might have different challenges if we tried to hold people for 4 minutes. That's why we reduced our expectation. And this is a pilot. It may not work. And if it doesn't, we've just added ramp meters that can coordinate with each other. But we think it's a valuable aspect. I know that California's looking at it. Arizona's also looking at intelligent ramp metering. So it's a new technology in the toolbox. Mm-hmm.
The start and stop on the freeway, I mean, you get the max. I mean, 2,000 is sort of optimized now, but if we had some future date autonomous vehicles, it might be a higher number because you would have
Yeah, so when I was speaking with some folks in Europe, they said that the introduction of autonomous vehicles in Paris actually degrades the system because they don't deal well with the traffic circles. But once you get to 20% penetration, now performance improves. And so once we have vehicles talking to each other, autonomous vehicles out there, I've seen projections of using 4,000 vehicles per lane per hour. I talked to a leader from Contra Costa County who thought it might be 6,000.
No.
And so
they're going to be like 6 inches per bumper off.
Right, at that point, but you in some parts of the country, you're at peak road because if you can double the capacity of the highway because you can move more vehicles through it, you're just making a better, more efficient use of an asset.
How about urban congestion smart lights? One of my nephews who's an engineer, and one of his friends has had a system used in Nevada, and now it's being tested somewhere in Virginia on crowdsourcing traffic lights. So that you're not sitting at a traffic light, and you're sitting there, and there's like no one coming the other way, but you're sitting there because it's a red light. I mean, has anyone deployed a system that you're aware of that works well for that, Mr. Awasaki?
Congressman DeFazio, there is a company in Marin County called RMS. They're looking at adaptive signals because that was the second most complaint that we got as we gathered information about to update our countywide transportation plan is people are tired of sitting at a stoplight when nobody else is around. Technology today ought to be able to let you go. And so the idea is adaptive ramp metering based on mainline flows of your freeway, hold a delay back. It's no different at a traffic signal. The problem is coordinating a queue of traffic through that during peak hour. It's off-peak that drives people nuts. Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's a company working on that now.
Okay, good.
We want to deploy that
technology. We'll have to follow up with that. Ms. Castillo, I represent a very large district, so I have a lot of rural challenges, and I'm impressed with your system. But what's it costing you per ride?
Currently, it costs an average of about $16 per ride. And we charge $2, so we're supplementing 14 of it.
Okay. And what do you project if you could move to an autonomous system? How much would that change?
So we have, even though we're in rural communities, we have some universities or some colleges, they're not universities, they're colleges, that are in those. And they have a lot of foreign students that come, and foreign students are usually used to very good public transportation. And so in college, it would be great to have, I could see like an autonomous vehicle allowing us to be able to serve them in a lot better way than what we're doing now. And I think we are starting to look at, typically in the rural systems, a lot of services provide door-to-door service, much like a paratransit service. And so autonomous vehicles would allow us to do more shuttle-type services so that it would be less expensive, because it's very expensive. Like you said, when you're doing paratransit, those costs are much higher. And so I do think that there's great opportunities in the rural communities to use autonomous vehicles for just change the look of what transportation looks like, but still get people where they need to go.
Okay, thank you. My time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Duncan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing I'm interested in, and anybody can comment who wants to, but just yesterday, Fox Business had an article that said driverless trucks could eliminate nearly 300,000 industry jobs over the next quarter decade, including more than 80,000 of the highest paying positions, according to a new study. And it says that as technology progresses, autonomous vehicles may replace about 51,000 less than truckload drivers and so forth and so on. It goes on. An additional 211,000 truckload jobs will also be vulnerable to elimination. What do you think about that, sir? Or what do you say about that? Have you considered that, or I'm sure you've thought about this?
Chairman Graves and Representative Duncan, thank you for the question. Obviously, the job displacement of automation is, I think, something that the federal, there is a federal role there as well. In Colorado, under Road X, we had the world's first commercial autonomous vehicle delivery where a truck went 100 miles on the interstate with the driver not in the driver's seat. And I actually got to be on Road Dog radio because this was a big issue for truckers. My feeling is that you will see a great deal of displacement probably in the next, like in a 20-year horizon, not in the next few years. And so I think what is important is that we spend the next few years making sure that if there are 300,000 jobs potentially at stake, that we're intercepting people who may be looking at that career and educating them around that. However, I would also say from a trucking perspective, I think that it's a little similar to an airplane where you have a lot of automation in planes, but you still have a pilot in there. And I could see a scenario where you have, for long-haul trucking, a truck driving itself for the overnight and long-haul portions of it. But when you get into an urban area, the driver taking back over just because of the complexity of that area.
Well, it's something to consider. I mean, right now people are saying that there's a shortage of truck drivers, and yet if this automation moves as fast as some people predict, it may be sooner than 20 years. And you're talking about 300,000 truck driving jobs and another 200,000 related jobs. That's a lot of jobs. So that's something that we need to be considering or thinking about. Also, there's another article here from just a few days, 4 or 5 days ago, that from the Washington Post that says the surveys indicate that large portions of the public harbor deep reservations about the safety of self-driving technology, and that it now is one of the biggest challenges facing companies developing driverless vehicles. What are y'all doing about that? Do you think that's a problem that's just going to take care of itself, or are you doing something about it? Mr. Barta?
Chairman Graves, Representative Duncan. Yeah, the two questions we get all the time associated with the technology, one is how safe it is, and two is how ultimately will it disrupt the workforce. To address the safety matters, you know, I look at Ohio, 2017 in, we had 302,282 total crashes. 1,179 of those were fatals. As with a lot of colleagues around the country, those numbers are going up, especially the fatal numbers are going up. Over the last 4 years, we've been seeing a 2% per year increase in our fatal traffic accidents. This technology offers a lot of promises as far as addressing those accidents. You know, I'd like to say this technology doesn't text down the roadway, it doesn't comb its hair, it's not eating a cheeseburger, and so forth. So we see a lot of promise as far as the safety, and as we do a lot of outreach to the public, we stress those numbers. 94% of all of our accidents are caused by human error. And that's where this technology will come in and hopefully reverse that trend. As it relates to the workforce you mentioned, that is true. You know, we have a lot of logistics in the state of Ohio, just the way we're positioned. A lot of the logistic companies are projecting 200 to 300,000 shortage of truck drivers over the next 5 to 10 years. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Bott, that It's not necessarily about the first last mile that may be impacted as most of that middle segment, which is the long haul, where they cannot get enough folks to drive trucks if you look at what's happening in the industry today. Be that as it may, as with any new technology, it ultimately disrupts the workforce in some form or fashion. And I think what we're doing at Drive Ohio is we have a group, workforce development. We're playing an active role not only in job training programs, but also looking at curriculum in high schools, STEM programs, everything like that, looking at the future jobs. I think if we get in front of this and be more proactive with it, that transition will be a lot more smoother than us just, going from one type of job to the other. So that's how we're addressing it in the state of Ohio.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alvio.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for being here today. I'm from New Jersey, and I probably represent the most congested area in the country. The town that I live in is 1 square mile. It's got 52,000 people in it. The other town, Hoboken, New Jersey, has about 51,000, and it's 1 square mile. And then I have other cities that are just as congested. So I will invite you to my district to test this technology out, to see how this thing works when you have so many people out on the road. We have every kind of transportation you can think of, from the ferry to the light rail to the buses to the illegal jitneys that stop in the middle of the roads to Uber. So I would think that out in the middle of nowhere testing this technology might not work as good as it will work in a district that is so congested. So I was just wondering, where have you tested that is so congested that you are so enthused about this technology in the future? I know that Columbus, Ohio, obviously is a big city, but I don't think they have 52,000 people, 1 square mile, and everybody wants to drive a car. I mean, you can't even park in my district. So have you tested in some of these areas? Well, go ahead, sir. You seem to be the most advanced, you seem to be.
Chairman Graves, Representative Sires, if I pronounce that right, we're looking at testing in the urban areas. Obviously, that's where we get most of the congestion. If we look at Columbus, Columbus is the fastest growing million-plus metro city in the country. It's the fastest growing in the Midwest. So we're starting to experience those pains now that some of the larger cities are. And what we're looking at is a combination of the connected technology where the infrastructure plays a role in that. My colleague, Mr. Bach, mentioned a smart lane or a hard shoulder run is what sometimes it's referred to in Michigan. We are now employing that technology in the city of Columbus, where ultimately we're looking at ways to push traffic through the same footprint. We can't build our way out of congestion anymore by adding pavement. It's just not working. So what we're looking at is pushing a lot more through that corridor than we used to yesterday. And that's mostly that connected technology, using shoulders where we can dynamically open and close based upon the level of congestion, using the smart meter systems, getting information to you so you can avoid certain congested areas. So it's a combination of all of that we're doing. The connected technology, as we model that, and this was mentioned earlier, the more and more we saturate a corridor with these connected vehicles, the lot closer these vehicles can run, and a lot more accidents that can be eliminated that truly causes most of the congestion in an urban corridor. So we're looking at them all, but yes, to answer your question, they're either under construction right now or they're being scoped out as projects right now as far as using this technology to move a lot more traffic through the same footprint.
Well, thank you. Mr. Brad, I would love a 4-minute just to get around a ramp in any part of my district. Believe me, 4 minutes, I'll take it any day.
Sir, thank you, Representative. And New York City is actually one of I think the largest deployment of V2I in the country right now. from a connected vehicle standpoint, getting that dissemination of information out along with Tampa and actually Wyoming as well. And I know that GM is testing their vehicles in San Francisco, again, another congested area. So there's a whole range of technologies, and we can follow up with your office afterwards around what some of them either may be in there or might be applicable for your region.
So come into the district.
I will, happy to.
We're inviting you, so you can, I'll take you around. You can
Thank
see,
you, sir.
you talk about cars close without technology. All right, thank you very much. I am excited about the, the future of this, but I just have a lot of concerns about it, and that's why, I ask these questions. I think we're not, it's going to take longer than that. In trying to get 50 states to be on the same page, that's even tougher. So I thank you for being here. Thank you.
Representative, may I add something to that? To your question?
Yep.
Please do. So this is the reason why the test beds are so important, is because you can repeat a test 1,000 times, not disrupt the countless number of vehicles that are in your district, and then when it's ready to be deployed, you can run it out onto public streets and make sure that that vehicle does exactly what it says in a very urbanized area with high congestion. And the other piece is on the getting the word out. 97 or 87% of the population is worried. They want a driver to take over just in case. And we liken that to the elevator. The elevator many, many years ago had an operator to pull that brake just in case if the cable broke. So in our case, one of our partners is AAA. So AAA has had this over 100-year reputation of laser focused in on safety, because they want to be able to talk to their members, at least in Northern California, 6 million members, and make sure they're aware of the progression of this technology so they aren't afraid when it's ready.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Ms. Esty.
Thank you very much, and this is really important and helpful information you're sharing with us here today. I represent a very diverse district. I've got congested cities, and I've got rural areas as well, and everything in between. And so I think one of the important things is to deal with some of these issues about equity. Equity for, my kids don't want to drive a car. They use ride-sharing apps, and they live in cities. But in my district, the people who need to upskill and get community college can't afford a car, and they can't get there because we've cut the local bus service. I've got veterans in the northwest corner of my district who are 30 miles from their doctor's appointments. So we have to be looking at systems, and I think talking about these systems not as a Silicon Valley fun to have, but as a need to have, to allow Americans who are aging like my mother, who can't be driving a car and shouldn't be driving a car, to get where she needs to go and not be locked in, but also for our veterans to get to appointments. And so part of that, I think, needs to be talking about it differently. When Model Ts came out, and I met a veteran recently, he told me he'd saved up $25, earning 25 cents an hour to buy his first car, and it was a Model T. We have people alive in this country who embraced that, and it displaced all of the buggy makers and all of the people who were shoeing horses, and America made that decision. Clearly this is coming, but we need to figure out how to be responsible, and it is going to be a long transition. So hearing from you and getting feedback as we go about how do we train the workforce that's going to be displaced, how do we make sure the public has confidence that they can do this and not get run over, but this we did face with cars. When cars first came in, we're sharing the road with horses. And I think we need to go back and look a little bit at that history and learn how did those transitions happen, what made them happen well, how did they deal with people who did get killed by getting run over by cars, how did America make that transition at that point? But I really would like to drill down a little bit on this question about how we make these technologies accessible to the people who don't have means, for whom it's not a nice to have. It's the people who actually, they need this to conduct their daily lives. They need this to participate in American democracy. They need this to get to their job. They need this to get to work. They need this to get to their doctors. And how long are we going to have to subsidize? Because that's part of it. People don't want to pay the subsidies, but otherwise Americans are going to be left behind. So I know, Ms. Castillo, you talked about, Norwalk, Connecticut is doing this, not my district, and Mr. Bott, how do we do this to make sure it's available to all Americans?
I have answered a lot, so I will let Ms. Castillo have some time here. I think mobility represents freedom. And for so many Americans, I think we view this as would I like to buy a new car that might have this cool self-driving feature? And for parents with teenagers, they probably don't want their kids driving. And for parents with parents, they may have issues with parents aging out of driving. And so there are tens of millions of Americans for whom this is not a cool technology issue. It represents a transformative chance for us to go out and connect them with jobs and hospitals and their loved ones in a way that we haven't been able to. So ITS America is incredibly passionate about making sure that our members are talking about that because, again, mobility is freedom.
Thank you. That is a great question. I think this is a great start to have conversations, especially bringing rural America into the discussions for technology. Oftentimes we are left out of those discussions because people think that people that live in the most rural areas don't necessarily need, because we're not facing congestion and all of that, but they still have a lot of issues and they still have a daily life to live and they need to get there. With autonomous vehicles, I think one of the things in rural America that we also need to talk about is the majority of the drivers that drive in our service areas are older. They've already retired. They left their career. This is a second, career for them, and so they're in their 70s and their 80s, and that is changing as people change. That generation is changing, and so all of that generation that doesn't want to just sit around and they want to serve and they want to help. Not that there's not people that want to do that, but that is changing. And so we're looking at driver shortages. And so we also have to look at how can we manage that. And I know that the people that in the more rural areas, they do like to have somebody on there. Our drivers know these people by name. They do that. There's nothing to say that we couldn't still give that same type of service on an autonomous vehicle. But we have to look at something because drivers is definitely going to be an issue. And I'm talking probably within the next 5 years, not 20 years. So I think we just need to continue to keep the discussions going. Rural America looks different to every rural area. You can talk to some people that say rural is, like a 5,000 county and they are driving huge distances, and then some that are butted up against urban areas, but they're still rural because they still can't get into the urban areas. So we just have to keep the discussions going. Thank you.
Chairman Graves, Representative Etsy. I look at that question's a great question, but more about the question, a great point is raised. What we see in this technology is about giving folks historically that haven't had access now the opportunity to have access and to do it in a sustainable manner. If we look at public transit today, in Ohio, we've lost 16% of our public transit ridership since 2011. A lot of that is Uber, Lyft, but also is a lot of it transit agencies pulling back routes. And what that is, and what we see with this technology, first last mile options here, whether it's sending these shuttles, we're all testing, and by the way, we're getting ready to test our first one in Columbus, Ohio in 60 days. But we're looking at different use cases with these shuttles all around the country. And it offers an efficient way to start giving folks who haven't had access to health care, jobs, entertainment. Think about the aging population, what this technology can offer. I was there when my father took the keys away from his father, and we may not have to do that tomorrow. And truly, access is very proportional to longevity, and that's, again, where we see this technology. We also we have a workforce corridor project where there's a challenge now with companies getting able bodies to their jobs. And now we're seeing, as we talk about public-private partnerships, we're seeing a more proactive role by the private sector in transportation. And that's the reason being. So we're studying between Cincinnati and Dayton. There's a lot of logistic companies between the two cities, and we're working with them, working with even private rideshare companies about how we can best get people to jobs. So the question was great, the point is great, but this technology offers probably more promise in giving folks access than we've seen, at least in my generation.
Chairman Graves, Representative Etsy, let me add a little bit to that. So we have 2 pilot projects, 2 car vehicles running on public streets in San Ramon currently. It's a private-public partnership in that the business park owner, it's a 600-acre business park, he has paid to lease these 2 vehicles for 2 years. So we're doing the testing in that fashion to try to figure out how does he get the 30,000 employees to their places of employment when the bus drops them all off at a location at their intermodal center. We're rolling out the 3rd vehicle that we have access to, the city of Dublin in the county to the south of us, Alameda County. And that's a public-private partnership. So the transit agencies, Livermore Amador Valley Transit Authority, and County Connection, our central bus provider in Contra Costa County, they're going to oversee that. So they don't get into the California Public Utilities Commission issue of running a jitney service and all those kinds of things because they have a license to do that. And so we're trying to make sure what is the right business model, because that's the piece that we can't figure out is how do we fund this in the future and what's the best way. And so through research, we're trying to figure out what is the best business model to do that.
Thank you very much. Remind the members that we have 5 minutes each, not 10 minutes. Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bennett, I have a question for you. Right now, when I watch transportation planning occur, oftentimes what happens is they'll lay down the rubber hoses and they'll count cars that drive over a certain road, determine a level of service, and decide if they need to add additional lanes or what have you. With the evolution of Google Maps and Waze, and actually one of my coworkers let me know that she still prints out MapQuest directions, which I didn't know existed. Thanks, Nancy. But you have this just amazing amount of data that doesn't just tell you where people are driving, but it actually tells you where they're starting and ending. And so in many cases, transportation planning could be revolutionized by taking that data and realizing that we don't need to add more lanes on the road that goes like this and goes like this and then comes back to here. The reality is many of the people, majority of the people are simply trying to do this. They're using these roads because it's the only way to get there. Are you aware of any efforts right now, anywhere in the country, where that type of integration is occurring to help to revolutionize transportation planning in a way where you can actually reduce miles traveled, save gas, save emissions, save time, anywhere in the United States or even around the world?
Yes, Representative Graves, there's a lot, and to manage the time, well, I'm happy to follow up afterwards as well. But you know, we use.
I think we have another 6.5 minutes. But
yes, we use sort of a late 20th century transportation planning process now that drives us into a 25-year plan, and then we make 50 and 100-year estimates. And all I know is that estimate is wrong because it doesn't take into account a lot of these technologies. And so it does need to change. It needs to evolve rapidly. What we did in Colorado at the DOT is we got away from making because we don't know yet what the impact of autonomous vehicles will be. Will it reduce VMT? Will it reduce demand? Will it increase demand? And will it increase the trips? And so what we've done is we started trying to develop scenarios. So early adoption, less VMT, more VMT, and you create scenarios around it. But there are lots of great examples nationally and internationally where people are integrating technology now into transportation planning so that it's not just 20th century planning.
I think autonomous vehicles are going to increase VMT because I'm going to be so mesmerized by the technology, I'm going to make it drive me in circles. But second question, and sort of related, are you aware of any, and going back to the first one, Secretary Fox and I, previous Secretary Fox and I had a number of discussions about ways to try and push that type of approach, because I think it really could revolutionize how we invest in transportation projects around the nation. But second, talking about Waze and Google and other apps that are available to help guide you in your traffic management. Are you aware of any efforts whereby those types of technologies are communicating directly with ITS systems to where the ITS is communicating back and saying, traffic light's going to be green in 48 seconds, drive 27 miles an hour, and you won't have to sit there and wait?
Representative Graves, yes, there's a SPAT challenge that's currently underway, trying to get all 50 states to get 20 signals coordinated so that you can communicate to the vehicle that a signal is going to be read. As Mr. Iwasaki talked about, moving through the corridor. There are lots of third-party providers that collect the data. The data is what is key around making these decisions, and you can get that data through third-party providers that are linked in with some of our transportation management centers. There's a VitaX deployment in Colorado right now, so that if somebody's airbag deploys, that information goes from vehicles to other vehicles and vehicles into the TMC to help disseminate that. So that is the next sort of great leap forward here, and that it is here now and getting more traction.
Oh, thank you. Look, I represent Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in addition to a number of other areas in South Louisiana. And we have, I think, last study I saw, I think the 14th worst traffic in the nation. Who would have thought Baton Rouge, Louisiana? And we're not going to be able to pour pavement fast enough to address our problems. And when you look at the surface roads that are available and the lack of efficiency there, it's going to have to be part of our solution. And technology, I think, can really help to buy us some time and help to alleviate some of the amazing traffic problems that we have. Love to work with y'all on that. I know that in the fast lane bill, we did emerging technology or technology grant program and others, but I think we're missing some opportunities to help gain some efficiencies. Yield back my 4 seconds.
Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. I thank our witnesses for being here today, and Mr. Iwasaki, look forward to being back out in Contra Costa sometime soon and see what the latest is that you're doing, especially at the Gomentum test site there. I would put Chicago's traffic up against anyone else's for the being the worst in the country. Technology we have great opportunities with technology to make real improvements. I wanted to ask about the issue in terms of testing, because we want this technology to get on the road so we can get all the advantages, but we have to make sure that it's safe. And as Mr. DeFazio had talked about earlier, about the choices have to be made about if there's who he's going to run over. He had to make that choice. So these are questions that have to be answered, but we need to know what the technology is going to do. We need to know the technology is safe. There's two things when you're talking about automated vehicle that you really need to test. You need to test whatever you're using for the sensors to sense what is around the vehicle, but you also need the software. And the software has to make the right decision, or the decision that we decide is the right decision in difficult edge cases. So is there a way, have you looked at anything in terms of using simulation to test the software? This is something, should we have a national standard where all the software needs to be tested in a particular simulation to determine if that software is safe for an autonomous vehicle? And I was wondering if anyone has done any work on that or has any comments on that, start with Mr. Iwasaki.
Chairman Graves, Representative Lipinski, thanks for the question. Appreciate that. We're actually we're not modeling any of the software currently out at Gomentum Station. We have a number of partners that are testing their artificial intelligence out at Gomentum Station. So Toyota Research and Baidu's on its 3rd generation of the Apollo platform, and Toyota Research is making great strides connecting their sensors to that artificial intelligence. But we had this conversation before about a standard testing protocol for the software, and we haven't started on that at Gomentum Station.
Anyone else have any? Mr. Barna?
Chairman Graves, Representative Lipinski, we are developing, as I'd mentioned in my testimony, 540 acres of autonomous vehicle, connected vehicle infrastructure at the Transportation Research Center. And what that's able for us to do is to test in that closed laboratory setting, testing software, testing the limits of the software and what the vehicles can do before we put it out on or within live traffic. So we are currently under construction, and those facilities include a 6-lane high-speed intersection, a highway loop, as well as residential streets with roundabouts, so we can take the software through kind of its, take it to the limits as far as what it's capable of doing. And then with TRC connected to the US 33 Smart Mobility Corridor, we could test it there and then bring it out into live traffic. But basically, that's the idea of the AVCB testing.
Does anyone think that having that the federal government should be developing or should have a set software that the an autonomous vehicle software has to be tested through to see what it does in all cases that we can posit?
Chairman Graves, Representative Lipinski, the National Highway Transportation Safety Association sets minimum standards as it relates to the automotive manufacturers, and that may ultimately be the vehicle where we set those standards as far as what the vehicle or the autonomous vehicle should be capable of doing. I agree at some point that probably should be set at some point in motion. If we look at infrastructure, if we look at, for instance, connected vehicles and certain standards, I believe that the federal government plays a role in setting those standards, setting the interoperability specifications so that we don't have a vehicle operating differently in all 50 states.
Just really quickly, Mr. Lipinski, I think that USDOT is providing some leadership in this. There are, under the federal legislation that's being considered, there are safety reports that would have to be submitted by the manufacturers. I also know that Turner Fairbanks is working with software developers, and they're looking to build some open source programs. So I think it's this blend of regulation and private sector innovation that I think will get to the safety component that you're looking for.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. LaMalfa.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate the panel being here today. Sorry my late arrival with other committees meeting at the same time. I'm going to come from maybe a little different angle on this. It seems when we're innovating for our surface transportation and traffic needs, we're not even fully using what we have, our capabilities we have right now. I mean, I'm all about traffic flow, and so when I travel my home state of California, I see that we're not even taking advantage of ability to, when we are spending money, when we have projects that are open, we're not adding additional passing lanes or things like that. We have this money here that's tied up in particular safety type spending and other dollars that are tied up in maybe adding, expanding capacity, things like that. And so they don't seem to be able to meld them together at the same time, so that when you have a project that is open and a piece of highway that's torn up, it's only think about do one or the other, not adding an additional passing lane. Or things such as stoplights that are timed better to keep traffic moving instead of all bottling up truck traffic and such, so that it takes miles and miles for the traffic to finally become less like a caterpillar and flowing again. So the frustration I have with traffic flow doesn't seem to be addressed as much by the bureaucracy. We have a project in my district, Highway 70 in Northern California, that desperately needs to be done. And we've had much carnage on there the last couple of years and over many years that has been, dollars are kind of going to move, finally going to move forward on that. But again, we're going to have to study it for 2 years, an existing highway, to add 2 lanes. I just wonder, can anybody on the panel comment on the inability to walk and chew gum at the same time on expanding these highway projects at the same time you're doing safety work, that you're not doing more flow work, not you, but in general, in the bureaucracy. I see we have somebody from Contra Costa here. Can we, would you like to touch upon that and see just in general on what, with our highways, anybody on the panel here, how could we do better with putting the dollars forward to have better traffic flow and not this frustration, because I know drivers out there are just continue to be frustrated. They have torn up highways and not the additional flow that I think that would be very helpful for all our goals.
Chairman Graves, Representative LaMalfa, I too am from California, and I too share sometimes your frustration. So we have a 7-pronged approach I mentioned earlier to try to fix congestion on a heavily congested corridor, Interstate 680. So it does allow for auxiliary lanes. Those are the widening between the interchanges, allow for weaving on and off the freeway. So it's a lengthened, it adds a little capacity to the roadway. We're also going to finish our HOV lane, and we're going to make them express lanes so that single occupant vehicles, if they choose and they're late, they want to pay a toll, they can get into that HOV lane, adding capacity to your mixed flow lanes. But when we go into a corridor, I was talking earlier about how we change the way we plan the future. And so what we're trying to do is not take today's technology, model against the next 30 years and determine we're going to have to widen every road in Contra Costa, because by the year 2040, our population is slated to grow by 29%. So what we try to do is when we go into the corridor, we want to do it once. The problem is in many cases when you're working for a DOT is you have a certain type of money that you're spending, and so you have a safety project. So you fix the safety project, but you need more capacity, but that's not the right kind of money to add capacity. That's the STIP.
That's as I was mentioning, why can't we have a better process of having them move in parallel when you got the construction there, when you got the roads torn up, when you had everything going on, add that additional lane or whatever it needs to be done.
That's correct.
That could be added. And so what can we do in this federal committee to be helping with that?
I think we need better planning. I think we need to incentivize better plans that once you go in and tear up a corridor, do it once, because that's what the taxpayers expect. They don't want to see 2 years of construction to put an auxiliary lane on the outside and then 4 years to put an HOV lane on the inside, and that's 6 years later, plus it took 20 years to plan the project. And I'm not here to talk about regulation reform because I was told not to, so I'm not going to do that.
But you feel it in your heart somewhere there, huh?
I do have it in my heart.
That's close enough, I guess.
We need to work together to make sure that the type of money is flexible enough so that on the state level as well, so we can do those projects and coordinate those projects, keeping in mind that the taxpayers are the ones that are affected. Our constituents are affected on a daily basis when you widen the right side, then come back 2 years later and widen the left side of the road.
And when you're talking about Highway 70, those people that are losing their lives in all the accidents on a state highway that's 2 lanes.
Correct.
That needed to be connected a long time ago to a 4-lane. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing together. I think it's very informative and very, very interesting and very, very exciting as well. But I live in a city in California, Thousand Oaks, which is one of the most bicycle-friendly communities in California. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, as we put more intelligence into our transportation systems, how is that interoperability working with pedestrians and bicycle traffic? Mr. Barna?
Chairman Graves, Representative Brownlee, it's very promising as we see more and more pedestrians and bicycles interacting with vehicular traffic. We're also seeing an increase in fatal accidents between cars, pedestrians, and bicycle. In our state, that number has gone up. This technology is now, we're getting to the point where the technology will be able to sense, whether in the blind spots or any types of objects, whether it's pedestrians, bicycles, and giving these drivers much more warning than they had before. So, as far as the connected vehicle environment, or even just it's a little more of the autonomous features that they're able to sense pedestrians, bicyclists all around. Just now, as many cars are coming off the assembly line today, you have the blind spot warnings where you see the lights in your rearview mirrors come on if there's somebody there. That is being, that technology is advancing to the point where we can detect pedestrians and bicyclists as well. If we look at it in a downtown space, our signals are actually becoming the eyes and ears for us there. So you making a right turn sometimes might be blinded by parked cars. You may not see a pedestrian in that crosswalk. What happens is now that signal identifies that pedestrian in that crosswalk and sends you a signal in your car that there is a pedestrian in that crosswalk. We are actually doing that testing right now as we speak in the city of Marysville as we advance signal technology. But the signal is acting now kind of as a watchdog for the entire intersection. It's sending messages to the car, hey, you've got a pedestrian in that walk, or you got a bicycle approaching such and such, let alone it's communicating that information to you, but it's also making decisions on its own as far as how it changes the pedestrian crossings, as well as even the red, greens in all directions.
Mr. Bott, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just really briefly, I think it's a great question. When you delve into the fatality increase across the country, where we're seeing the biggest increases in vulnerable users of the system, bicyclists, pedestrians, motorcyclists, and I believe it's because of this epidemic of distracted driving that we have out there. One of our members, New York City, has this great program called Vision Zero, and they've actually seen a reduction in pedestrian and bicycle fatalities, and all of the technology that's out there, I think, will help us with this distracted driving issue, which is really driving a lot of these fatalities.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Castilla, I wanted to ask you, my other responsibility in Congress is taking care of our nation's veterans, and I was just wondering if you collected any data in what you're doing out in the rural areas on veterans. I know there's a medical center in Iowa. There's obviously community clinics throughout, and if you're collecting any of that data in terms of veteran use.
Yes, we work with our veterans associations, and they all have their own vehicle, which they take a lot of veterans to various clinics, but because their vehicles are not accessible vehicles, we've partnered with them, and we allow the veteran to, we take them to the Veterans Hospital in the Des Moines area or in the Marshalltown area, and then they just reimburse us for a cost because they're not able to take those. So we do have that data. I don't know what that is off of the top of my head, but yeah, we store all of that in our software.
Well, I would love to, if you would share the data, I'd love to
I would
see
absolutely
it, because
do
I
that.
think it's what you're doing is possibly an important solution in terms of veterans getting to their health care throughout the country. So I'd actually like to see the data.
I will absolutely share that with you. It's kind of it's been difficult to be quite honest when working with the VAs. But we don't want to take the transportation away from them. We just want to be able to partner with them in doing that. So I think there's some more opportunities we have. We just haven't been able to make those quite connections, but I will get you the data, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Smucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you holding a hearing on this topic. It's fascinating for me to contemplate what our transportation system will look like just a few decades from now. We know mobility will be increased, and that will change the lives of so many people and increase their quality of life. But it's also really great to see the work that each of you are doing. I appreciate all of you being here, but also for the innovation that you're driving in your organizations. Mr. Barnett, you just a few questions ago mentioned two specific areas of public policy, really from our perspective, that you all are impacting in a big way, and that is, one, folks do want to age in place at their homes, and transportation has always been one of the biggest barriers to that. So some of the things that you're doing will increase their quality of life and enable them to stay with their families longer. And then the other is, today we have huge workforce needs, and we're working to connect people who are not participating in the workforce today with jobs that are available and will help lift people out of poverty. And transportation has always been one of the biggest challenges there. So the kind of things that you're doing is helping in that area as well. Ms. Castillo, you mentioned in your testimony just a little bit ago that one of your ongoing challenges is staffing and how you struggle to recruit and retrain employees. I'm bouncing back and forth between two hearings. There's one just down the hall with Ed and Workforce Committee, and we're talking specifically about apprenticeship programs and other things that policies that we could be advancing here at the federal level What I hear from you is not unlike what we hear from companies all across my district and all across the country. Truck drivers are in short supply, and in fact, companies everywhere are having trouble filling positions as we see more retirees. You said that a lot of your drivers are 65 years old and older, and you're going to have a severe shortage within 5 years. So what, in your opinion, can we be doing here at the federal level to ensure that there is a skilled workforce pipeline in place that can fill those positions? Maybe 20 years down the road, we don't need as many drivers, but now we certainly do. So what can we be doing?
And I do speak from a rural perspective. Employers typically in the more rural settings are not at a pay grade that a lot of the urban employers are. And so people want to make more money, a livable wage actually. And in the majority of the rural systems with drivers, they're all part-time. Very few of them have full-time positions with benefits. And so for us to recruit younger drivers who would like to stay in our agency and, you know, grow with us, which would be ideal, they can't live off of a part-time job during the day. So it is, and for rural transportation systems, it really does come down to funding. We're all doing multiple jobs. As our urban counterparts, you know, have all departments of these people and these people and these people, we have a person that is 4 departments. And so, and a lot of that just comes down to funding. I mean, it's an issue with funding. So one of the things that we've been doing is really working toward commuter transportation and trying to get that so that employers are buying into that. We've been working with economic development so that what we're doing also has an impact in the community, and hopefully some of that then they buy into our system as well. And so that's kind of keeping some of the money flowing kind of in a circle that we're helping our whole community. Because when we talk about, you know, our communities, like there are communities. We live in these small communities. Our drivers know all of the people that we're serving. So that's really important to us to keep that going. But it is actually getting people to make a livable wage, and that's where the smaller transportation agencies need to come up to that. Unfortunately, we just don't have the funding to do that right now.
Thank you. Just one other quick question for Mr. Iwasaki. You had mentioned in your written testimony the importance of gathering public input. And you're employing some of the latest technologies to engage with stakeholders, and you've seen a real increase. So could you expand just a little bit about how that works?
Chairman Graves, Representative Smucker, thank you for the question. So we have changed the way we normally go out and gather public input. Normally you go to a library at 6 o'clock in the evening on a Thursday and you get 20 people, 40 people, 10 of your consultants, and the other 30 don't like you. And so you get a very skewed input from the public. And so what we've done is we've used social media. So we've revamped the website, Keep Contra Costa Moving, asked you for your input. We give you an allocation of Contra Costa coins, COCO coins, 10. You make an investment, everybody, and we know exactly where you're logging into the computer. So if you're in Alameda County, you don't count, but if you're in Contra Costa, you do. We've changed the way we use Facebook. So Facebook now gathers information for us, and we aggregate all that information. We changed the telephone town hall. Normally, you propagate out your message, you're running for governor or wherever, and you send out a robocalled message to thousands of people. What we do is we robocall 15,000 people in each of the 4 subregions of our county and say on Friday night, the executive director and an elected board member, they're going to answer your questions about transportation live for an hour and a half. And we ask polling questions. Do you like potholes? Press 1. Do you not like potholes? Press 2. Those kind of, it's not that basic, but you get the point. So when we aggregated all this information, the 4 things came up. 1, they don't like potholes. Number 2 is they don't like those gosh darn red lights that at midnight when nobody else is around. 3, they want a better subway, BART system. 4, they want a first and last mile solution. So when we aggregated all this information together, we got more comments this cycle of our countywide transportation than the previous 25 years combined. And I think that we don't use enough social media to mind. Sure. We tend to use the old methodologies that don't work, but yet we gather information that way. And we're seeing things from a skewed perspective, and we don't see things from an overall perspective. I think technology is helping us gather better information, make better decisions on using our federal, state, and local funding.
And allows a lot more people to participate as
Absolutely.
well. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pat, In your testimony, you mentioned a need for a comprehensive electric vehicle or EV infrastructure plan. I represent this Detroit. I represent the Motor City. I have GM as world headquarters. I have, in my district, one of the largest number of Tier 1 R&D for all the parts, and everyone's testing electric vehicle. I had an opportunity to ride in an autonomous vehicle. It was some interesting moments in it, but it was still autonomous. I have heard repeatedly from the industry that while I heard Mr. Barna say he did not want regulations, but we must move forward to a national plan when we start talking about autonomous vehicles and our infrastructure plan for electric vehicles. Please tell me how you and your colleagues can help us move faster in that discussion, because it is, for me, a giant failure if we are going to be behind the 8 ball. All the technology is ready and every state is trying to implement their own plan, and then we are actually hindering the real success of innovation if we don't have a national plan. So would you please comment on that?
Thank you, Representative Lawrence. My wife was actually a teacher at Renaissance High School in Metro Detroit.
Oh, cool. Yes.
So from there, just spent the weekend there. And our vice chair, our chair next year is Gary Smith from General Motors, head of global R&D. And so Detroit gets it. Michigan is a hotbed. There's all kinds of activity around the country. I think you have a great question. And we have to find that right balance of regulation that creates a level playing field and standards for everybody that doesn't then stifle the innovators that are working in Contra Costa County or in Ohio in order to move forward. On the EV piece, I think it is generally accepted that the future of transportation is electric automated. It's not in the next couple of years, but over the next coming decades. This has an implication for gas tax revenues and others. But I think that the innovators are out there, whether in California or Michigan or around the country. We just need to provide a level playing ground and framework. And USDOT is taking strides in this realm, but I think the next authorization can take some important steps there.
Have you all gotten together to say this is a plan that we think will work? Or are you resting on the shoulders of the brilliant minds of Congress to present a plan?
So we have our association represents over 30 states, cities, private sector companies, research institutions, and so we have a task force that will be meeting on reauthorization needs. We're already having those discussions now because while we have great faith in Congress's ability to provide good legislation, we want to provide the best input possible.
And I just want to be on the record. Great innovation is not solely in the hands of Congress. It has to have all hands on deck. And I'm always concerned at the speed and the progress. We get there eventually, but this technology is one that we really need all hands on deck so that we can be efficient and be timely so that we're all moving forward together. So your task force, I really welcome some input. Now, this is a question for you, Mr. Barna. I am a person who really gets the crisis that we're having in our skilled trade and our workforce. As we innovate, as we move forward, our workforce is not moving at the same pace. So, we need the educational community on board, but we also need you, the innovators, and those in corporate America to be a partner. Can you talk about how in the state of Ohio, are you looking at your workforce for autonomous vehicles and for connected vehicles? How are you building that workforce, and what type of opportunities are there going to be for American workers in your field?
Chairman Graves, Representative Lawrence, that's another great point you do. And it's a, as I mentioned before, next to safety, workforce is the #2 question we get. We created a group within Drive Ohio that specifically focuses on workforce development. All these projects that we showed on the slide around the state of Ohio has to have a workforce development component to it. So as we do each of our projects, it's not just a bunch of engineers sitting in a room trying to develop connected technologies. We actually have academic partners, private sector partners, and we're looking at a workforce component to each of the projects. So we're involving community colleges. We may go to the high schools. A lot of our meetings to which we hold in Drive, Ohio, our last one was at a STEM program. So we have a group under the direction of Rich Granger, the state of Ohio, who actively gets involved with folks developing curriculum. And what we do is look at curriculum surrounding this type of technology. So if we go and install some of the infrastructure for one of our projects, there's terms we use as onboard units, which you put these receivers, transceivers in cars, or roadside units is the receivers, transceivers on the highway. We're actually getting the students involved to be able to help install the technology. It's not that easy. Where we see opportunity.
I do want to say, because I know my time is running out, that's exactly, I really appreciate how you have looked at not only the innovation, but the educational of the workforce. And I want to really engage you and with your representative as we talk about workforce so we can use best practices around the country. I yield back my time, and thank you so much, and I'm excited about the flying car that will be coming soon.
Thank you.
Seeing that there are no other further questions, I'd like to thank each of our witnesses for your testimony today. Appreciate it very much. And with that, I would ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. With that objection, that is so ordered. No other members, obviously there are none, have anything to add, then the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.